My colleague Dan Benson. I'm the technical product manager for enterprise search at Microsoft, and Dan is an architect on the strategic search consulting team.
Yep, please, no photos. We're going to have to take that from you. Just kidding.
So I thought I'd just kick things off, just to get an understanding from the audience of how many people here have actually worked with Fast Search for SharePoint. Could I just get a hands up? Okay, and how about just regular SharePoint search? Okay. And just out of curiosity, do we have any people who've done anything like around extending the pipeline with Fast Search for SharePoint? Great, okay. Well, that's helpful for us. Just wanted to know the kind of level that we want to talk to today. So I want to start for a second with a picture that I like. And the reason I put it up there is because people typically come into these sessions, and what they think about when they think about SharePoint and creating great end-user experiences is, show me the code. How do I configure a web part? What do I do? And the first point that I wanted to make around search is that I think that search is kind of a special thing when it comes to SharePoint. And the reason I think that is because so much that we can do doesn't involve writing code around search to create a great end-user experience. This is an example of a folly. I think it's the world's largest folly, actually. And a folly is something that's a building that's put in place without any meaning or purpose. So it looks like a castle. It's got windows, but you'll notice it has no doors. In fact, it has no floors and has no purpose other than to look like a castle. And in my mind, many of the intranet and internet sites that we put out there today, we put a search box up there, not because we necessarily think our users will use it or that we'll even use it ourselves, but because it was there in the requirements and we had to put it there. And we're really hoping with the releases we've had, Fast Search for SharePoint, and what we're doing in our programs, is that we can try and change that perception, start to get not just technical influence and search, but actually get the business to start buying in and making the end experience better. Because the end experience, at the end of the day, if all I give you is 10 blue links, it may not look that flashy, but if it gives you the answer you're looking for, actually that's a great end user experience when it comes to search. So, the search experience, we think about three things. We think about the user experience, we think about the technology that came around to actually empower that, and we think about the content. When you're out there thinking about creating great end-user experiences for search, we have to think about all these things. And in today's session, what we're hoping to do is help you understand a bit about, and granted, there's a lot you can cover here, but some of the ways that you can go to improve the content around search, how you improve the information that's flowing in, and also some of the things you can do to make the user experience at the other end a little bit better. So, we're going to cover a few things. The first is, what is search customization with Fast Search for SharePoint? There's a lot of shared similarities and traits with SharePoint 2010, and there are some differences. One of those differences being the pipeline extensibility, something that you see in Fast Search for SharePoint. But something that's common to SharePoint Search is how we extend the out-of-box user experience. Now, again, we're going to go and we want to try and show you some real things as opposed to just talking to slides. But just for anyone in here who doesn't necessarily know what we're doing in 2010, I'm going to start off with just a very brief overview of what we're doing. And then after that, Dan is going to show you an application that he put together that will show you how we are extending the pipeline to detect the sentiment of a document. Now, the main purpose of this was not actually to be a proper sentiment analyzer. The main purpose of this was to show you how you could extend the pipeline to take some content and to do something with it. And then how we could extend the front end to show the sentiment. So, as we start from the top, this is a diagram that may be familiar to folks who know Fast Search for SharePoint. We start off on the right-hand side with the content that's coming in. Everything comes through our crawler when it comes into SharePoint Search. And the crawler is the aspect that goes and tells us when we should be looking at data sources, how often we should be looking at it, how we log it, all those kinds of things. We then move into content processing. Now, this is something that, for the most part, is somewhat unique to Fast, and we'll go over that in a bit more detail in a second. Next, we index that content, make it ready for to be queried. After that, finally, we have a query processor. And sitting on top of that query processor is our Federation OM. And the Federation object model in SharePoint Search 2010 does everything to do with search. Anytime you are running a search, whether it's a SharePoint search or not, we're running that through our Federation object model. And the reason that's important is because down the road, when it comes to extending out-of-box web parts or doing new things entirely, you can piggyback off of that and do some great new things. So we're going to be showing you the pipeline extensibility and the Federation object model as part of this demo today. So what happens inside FAST itself? Or what happens before we get the content to FAST, I should say. So from a very high level, we as an administrator somehow instruct to crawl or instruct to do some sort of content acquisition. We have a crawl database, and its job, as numerous jobs, one of its jobs is to put out tasks to our crawlers. The crawlers are stateless. They don't know what they're doing. They don't talk to each other. The purpose of this is if we want to crawl a very, very large site, we can split that workload up and have it done by multiple crawlers. Those crawlers can talk to websites. They can talk to databases, anything you want. And after that's done, that crawler's job is to report back what did it do, anything else that's going on. In addition, we may also add new documents that we found and other instructions. So when all is said and done, when that crawler has crawled all the content, it now has to put it somewhere. And in Fast Search for SharePoint, that's where the handoff happens into the Fast-specific areas. So what is that? The Fast Content SSA moves content into the content distributor. The content distributor is, again, something that is used for scaling and areas like that. It's a smaller piece, really. Then that moves into what we call item processing. Item processing is what most people refer to as the pipeline. And I'm going to go into that in detail in just a second. And after that, we then move into index dispatching and put the content into the index. So really the key thing to understand here is that as the content is coming into Fast, what we're really trying to do is to get it to go through our pipeline, and it's at that point that we have an ability to do all sorts of fun stuff. So what is that exactly? So the Fast content processing pipeline has a few stages. We have to convert formats to make sure that everything is in line for us to work with it. We have to detect the language. The language detection is really, really important for us with Fast because when we're doing entity extraction with dictionaries and things like that, if we don't know what language the content was written in, then we don't know which dictionaries to apply when it comes to extracting entities. Tokenization is the next stage. Moving on to lemmatization, just understanding lemmatization, that's the difference between stemming and lemmatization. With stemming, I might take the word run and running, and I know that those two are related. When I'm with lemmatization, what I'm actually doing is understanding that the past tense of ran also is the same as run and running. So there's actually quite a lot that you have to do to get to that point, understanding the grammar and the context. As mentioned, entity extraction. Out-of-box Fast Search for SharePoint will extract people, companies, and locations, but you can extend that with your own dictionary to do what you want. Date-time normalization, document vector. This is something that we use for finding similar documents. Essentially, what we'll do is extract, is try to summarize a document in what we call a document vector, which are the most important aspects of that document, and we use that when we're searching when you click on the Find Similar button. Web link analysis. This is very similar to what you might do on a web search engine externally, where we're looking for inbound links to try and drive authority of sites. What's very important about this is if we set up in the beginning our authoritative sites, the web link analyzer actually can help us in really driving a much better relevancy. And just before we go to map our crawl properties is the point at which we go to extend our pipeline. And that's what we're going to show in just a second here. So but very quickly, essentially the way it works with it, from a very, very high level, and Dan will go into detail, is we have our XML file that's coming, that will be our input to our pipeline extensibility. That file is outputted by the pipeline into a specific directory that we can then pick up, use, and then we output the results of our work that we're doing to extend the pipeline, ready for the pipeline to pick back up again and push into the index. So Dan is now going to show you the first part of our demo, which will cover how we actually go around extending the pipeline itself.
Okay,
right.
Thanks, Mark. Can you flip me over to C?
Sure.
So the way I'm going to demo this, the first part of this demo is I've got a virtual machine set up, largely thanks to Barry Waldbaum, who's in the audience today, that has basically SharePoint running, fast search for SharePoint, and a bunch of programs that those need to run. SQL Server, I've got Visual Studio so that I can do development on there. So what I'm going to talk about during this part of the demo is basically three things. I think Mark did a nice job covering the document processing pipeline and sort of how it's differentiated from SharePoint search and where we can fit in to be able to do some custom things. So I'm going to show you how the pipeline extensibility stage calls our custom application, the configuration of that. I'm going to show you the code for our sentiment analyzer. Again, as Mark mentioned, it's not a production quality sentiment analyzer. It's just an example of where we can plug in. I'm going to show you how to deploy that, where the executable is sent and the configuration. There's a script of PowerShell commands we use to tell fast about our new managed property, which is going to be a sentiment field, and also map the new crawled property to a managed property. And then finally, there's another stage I'm going to show you in the pipeline called SPY, which just allows you to basically see at any point in the pipeline, it'll dump a file out of what fast has in regards to that document. So for example, if we are at some point in the pipeline before entities are extracted, like people and companies, then you're just going to see some simple metadata, maybe the body of the document. We're going to talk a lot about the body, which is basically, to a search engine, just the extracted text. It's what you see when you open the Word document.
And it's quite great actually to be able to see some of these things from a SharePoint Microsoft side, because some of these were for a long time the tools of the trade for people inside fast global services. So some of these tools, starting to show them and see how they work, is really a valuable thing if you're using fast search for SharePoint.
Yep, so that's the, so I'm going to use that to display the output, to show our sentiment analyzer and what it did to mark up the document. I'm going to show you where our application can write files to, so that, for example, Mark mentioned that the pipeline extensibility stage is going to feed us an input file. That file is going to be XML. We want to be able to look at it and see how we need to process it, or look at many of them and maybe use them to reiterate as we work on our code. So there's going to be some debugging things at the end as I show you how to push a document into the fast index, and then how to look at what's happened to it as you transform it. So let me jump right into Visual Studio, favorite place. And so this is the configuration for pipeline extensibility. At the minimum, it has basically an input and an output. It's kind of like any function. So you're gonna tell the pipeline extensibility stage how to run this. So I'm gonna build. Can everybody see that? Okay. Okay. So I'm going to build this sentiment analyzer executable. It's going to get called as part of the pipeline with an input XML document. It's going to output an XML document with the information that I extracted. So basically what you're seeing here in input is you've got a property, and there's this property set. This is actually a unique property set to fast search for SharePoint. It's created in the pipeline, and a property set is basically just a collection of properties, strings, items, whatever you want to call them, date, time, integers. For this particular one, it contains 3 properties, and it's created in the pipeline, and it contains a data property, which is basically if the document as a whole, so for example, the entire binary document, before it's converted from Word or Excel or PDF or whatever else, and then it contains a body property, which is just the extracted text I mentioned a few minutes ago, and then it also contains URL. But I'm most interested in the body today, so my sentiment analyzer is going to look at the text of the body and try to determine whether this document as a whole is positive or negative. And then it's going to output that to a new property called sentiment, which brings me to the code.
So one thing to add here is that we're showing you a very, very simple example,
Yep.
But there's all sorts of things that you can do with this. The fact that you can call an executable and do what you want means that you can create something that calls a web service or any of those kinds of things. So you shouldn't sort of limit yourself just to fairly basic manipulations.
Correct. So, what do I have here? I've created basically a console application project type, so the output is going to be my executable. I just went ahead and named it Sentiment Analyzer, and I think that's application. Yep. So it's going to write that file out, and then you can add debug properties to it that so you can test it with it, the inputs and outputs. Let's go back there. So I'm defining the properties that I'm interested in at the top, the summary information. I showed you those in the pipeline extensibility config. This is going to be the body, the input up here. I'm going to output into my sentiment field either like or dislike. So very simply, at the start of this program, I just want to check the number of arguments. Like I said, by default, there will be 2. I'm actually passing in 3. One being a number of whether I want to write the documents out to the local load directory or whether I don't, depending on what mode I'm in. So the very first part of this, we're going to fetch the body property from that input file, just making sure that we get it from the summary information GUID property set that we showed before. And we're just going to set that value to a result. This is going to end up, again, body, just the text of the document, what we're looking at to determine whether it's overall positive or negative. Then in the second block here, we're going to create an output element. The document is the top level element, and going to output the property set we defined above into an item called sentiment. Now what this program does is evaluate the first method. It's going to evaluate this for true or false and then put either like or dislike. So if I go to definition, I'm passing in the body here, and basically I've loaded a dictionary of sentiment terms, so good, bad, ugly, awesome, things like that, and that's what I'm looking for in the body. And what I'm going to do is just start a counter, and I'm going to loop through each of those terms and do a match on items in the body and basically count them up. So if there's more goods than bads, we're just going to pass back a like versus a dislike. Nothing too complicated. So then, once we build this, we need to deploy it. And one of the first parts of deploying it is setting up the crawled and managed properties I mentioned before. What we have here is a script that basically runs 3 PowerShell commands. The first part here, I'm just going to set up the meta crawled property, which is the output sentiment that we're writing to. In the second part here, I'm going to create a metadata manage property out of it so that FAST knows about it. It's a field in the index. It can pass it back, refiners on it, sort on it, things like that. I'm going to set refinement enabled to 1 so that we can have that section over in the left side of the user interface that lets us drill down on the sentiment. And then finally, I'm just going to map these 2 properties together, the crawled property and the managed property. And now, I've already run this script last night, so I'm going to spare you. Oh, that's actually what it looks like if you run it after you've already run it.
It's a good point, though, which is if you are starting to explore more around search with SharePoint, you should look into some of the PowerShell commands you do. PowerShell has a huge amount of things that you can do with it in search, and it's really worth taking the time to, if you haven't already, try and understand a bit more about it. Sometimes it can look a bit scary from the command line perspective, but actually it really starts to make sense quite quickly. And it will enable you to do some things that you couldn't ordinarily do just through a GUI.
Okay. So now that I've created that crawled property and managed property that my custom application is going to write to, I need to deploy this so that FAST can execute it and knows about it. So in the FAST search directory, which is generally just under C FAST search, I'm going to copy my executable over there. The bin directory is where all of the FAST, or most of the FAST search binaries and executables live. So it's not perfect, but it makes sense. I'm just going to replace that. And then the pipeline extensibility configuration I created is going to go in the fast search etc directory.
And to reiterate, this is what tells the search engine what it should be doing with that executable and how it should handle it.
Correct. So I'm going to copy that over there, and we're basically all set to go. So this is where I get into a couple things about debugging. We've got our executable, we've got our configuration, so we're going to pass some content to fast. It's going to know how to call this executable and take care of the information that it gives back to fast. So next, I'm going to show you a couple tricks of how we debug this. So there's a couple ways to get content into fast. Mark mentioned the prominent way, which is to set up a crawler in the SharePoint content SSA. I'm going to show you another way that isn't necessarily supported. I don't want to say supported, but it's useful for debugging. It just gets the document into the index. So if you're just doing a small amount and you want to iterate, and your program is crashing, etc., there's a tool called doc push you can use to just push any document right in there. Again, it's not something you want to use in production because it doesn't crawl security or permissions or anything like that. But it's a good way to show you what's happening here. And then I can go show you, again, we were going to write the input file out to the person who's running, actually, where's central admin? So we can only write to the local low directory of the user that is running our content SSA. So while that loads up, and I'll show you how to find that, I'll show you the directory that I'm talking about. So the administrator happens to be the user that's writing to this, and I know this by looking at managed service applications. And I'll just click on fast content, properties. So the Contoso administrator is the guy who's running this particular SSA. And so I'm writing to a directory in the local low directory below app data in his user directory. And I don't know how many of you know what the local low is, but it's a place, a home for letting low integrity, not so savory applications write to disk.
Which, if you know Dan, is probably the best place for anything he writes.
There's definitely got to be some bugs in there. So I'm going to feed a document right now. I can delete this. And show you using doc push. So I have a couple documents here, test and test one. So I'm just going to use doc push, and I'm going to tell it which collection. Now, Fast Search SharePoint out of the box only has one collection, and it's SP. And I'm going to feed test. Actually, one second. Let's see which one I don't have. One. And so this is going to take a few seconds to run. It's going to go a lot faster than setting up a crawl on your SharePoint site. And we'll see a document, the input document, show up here. There it is. Oh, it's actually XML. So we have our document, our crawled property that we're looking for, and it's giving us the body. And in the body of this document, I just have words we're looking for: good, bad, test one, awful. So this would be a lot bigger for normal Office document content, but this is just an example. So that's what was passed in. Now, let's look at that again. So what I'm seeing here, a rough count, is that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 good words and 2 bad. So this one should be like. So I mentioned that spy document that I can pop out. I want to show you where I made that happen, and then I'll show you the output of the document with hopefully our new field, sentiment.
And by the way, a lot of the information we're showing you today, there are samples and examples out there on MSDN. So don't think that you have to write everything down or understand everything. But it's good to know these things exist and to be able to actually search for them to find them.
So in my fast search etc directory, I have a pipeline config, which has our customer extensibility, which is what we're talking about today. And then you'll see the rest of these are in there by default. You'll see this little guy I added down here, spy. So he's going to write a file with all of the known properties to my fast search var log directory. And let's just open that and see if we got our new property. So I'll just do a search for sentiment. And so the document that just went in, as we looked at the document, the input document got a sentiment of like, which is accurate. So I know that I've got it this far along. I saw the input, I see the output, and next I'm going to want to verify that I have it in the user interface, which will bring us to the SharePoint Search Center.
Okay, so hopefully everyone is still able to follow from some of the code.
Is there any questions there? I'm sure there might be a few. Go ahead.
The very last piece, how did you get the output of the properties that were actually indexed?
Okay, good question. So what I did was, if you look, and again, this isn't something you go to production with, but it's something that is available while testing. So if I go to my etc directory, there is a file in here that defines the pipeline itself. It's called pipeline config. So it has a stage in it from the old days called spy. So it just lets you output the properties that FAST knows about at the time. And if you see this line here, it writes the var log spy, which is where I picked up that document. So what I did was, it's just called a processor, and the pipeline is defined at the bottom. So I just stuck it in here so I could see the output.
And this is the pipeline that we're talking about when you see things flowing through. Okay.
Okay.
So now we actually want to go through and start to extend the user experience. So just very quickly, the out-of-box user experience for fast search for SharePoint looks something like this. What you'll see in the center is the core results web part, which has the image previews, which is sort of a hallmark of fast search for SharePoint versus SharePoint search. You'll see on the right-hand side people search and federated search, and on the left you'll see deep navigation. Now, when we talk about the core results web part here, this is where really a lot of the magic happens within FAST. So all the other web parts will hang off of this one and get the information they need. And this is the web part, the core results web part, that interacts with the Federation OM. And that's when we talk about how we actually go through. We inherit from the data form web part. This allows us to write our own XSLT. And then we can use data source and data source view classes to actually configure that query and then get the results. What does that conceptual view look like exactly? So location configuration. This is, I can have one or many locations. One location that's sort of standard out of the box is going to be my SharePoint search index or query. But I may have many other locations. For example, if I'm using OpenSearch, I may have Yahoo stock ticker or any sorts of information coming through there. So all of our location information comes through here. Finally, through the data source view, that informs the Federation OM, and whether you're the core results web part, paging statistics, the refinement panel, all those things are going to be pulling their information from the Federation OM to get what they need. And again, we talk about that as being very, very important because that's really what allows us to have actually a fairly easy time with extending out-of-box web parts and doing some quite cool things. So Dan is now going to show you probably the more visual side of the presentation, which will be to what the end result actually looks like.
Okay. Can you flip me over to C again? So one thing Mark mentioned in that last slide, or the one before that, was pretty interesting, is the visual awesomeness, the document preview of Word. What you see here is I haven't refreshed this since I fed that last document, and one thing you might note is that there is not Word preview. And I would say that's one of the problems of the debugging using doc push, right? The Word documents have to live in SharePoint 2010 for the doc preview functionality to work, so I just thought I'd point that out. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to do two things during this part. One is I'm going to show you, if you remember when we added our new managed property, we went ahead and set refinement enabled to true. So I want to show you how to add that refinement over here to the left side so that we can drill down on the sentiment and refine our results based on like and dislike. So the first thing I want to do here is click Site Actions, Edit Page, and I'll just scroll down to my refinement panel, Edit Web Part, and we're going to click on the refinement box. And what we're going to do in here is we have this thing called filter category definition. And what that basically is saying is which refiners you want to bring back for fast search and then some of the default values of them. Now this looks like a bunch of garbly-gook, so I've added my refiner, my custom refiner to be, where are you? Right there. So in this file, I've tried to clean it up a little so it's a little bit more readable. So I added my sentiment refiner to the top, and there's just basically, this is XML, there's a description, number of filters to display, so that would be by default if you had many more values than 2 in this example. It would show 4 and bring back a total of 20, but the other 16 would be hidden under JavaScript, and you could get to those by adding the show more link and then the text show more or show fewer. You can call that whatever you want. So I want to add this XML. Oops. To I want to get rid of all this. And now I have my new XML. And make sure you uncheck this one as a gotcha use default configuration because we just changed it. Not sure why that's there. And you go to Save and Close. And you've got you'll notice that there's 4 results now. This test 1 is a result of the last document I fed. And then you have a total of 4, a couple dislikes, and a couple of likes. So you can refine by those. You know, with a larger result set, you can see how this would be a lot more powerful. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple things to the core web results, which is this area. One is the property to bring back, and then I want to see it brought back. So now in our chain of feeding, understanding what the input file looks like, understanding what the output of that is as it looks to fast with the SPY stage, now we want to see how it comes back to SharePoint and how we get that field and do something with it. So what I'm going to do is edit the page again. And I'm going to edit the core results web part and change a couple things here. I didn't click the right thing. Okay. So I'm going to click on Display Properties, and I'm going to come down here, and the first thing is Fetch Properties. So I want to ask fast for my new sentiment field that is in the index. And this is just one really long, gnarly string, so I'm going to show you in Visual Studio. fetch properties. So what this is it's just columns and then a list of columns you want back, columns being fields, properties, whatever you want to call them. You'll see some of the ones that you see on the normal core results page: title, author, there's path, highlighted summary, which is showing the highlighted good, bad, etc. So I'm going to take you all the way to the end of this where I tagged on my column, which is sentiment, and add that.
And that matches the name that you gave it in PowerShell when you mapped the property.
Correct.
Is that case sensitive?
I don't believe so. I'm sorry. Okay, so this guy, let's go shift to the end. I'm just going to paste it, Control V, sentiment. And so one thing I want to show you here is you have the default view down here of the search core results, and I want to show you real quick two things. One, we were talking about debugging and seeing if our field is even returning before we start writing something to transform it into something pretty. So if you go to this, and this is on MSDN or similar to just basically a style that grabs, or a style sheet that grabs all the XML. It doesn't really do any transformations. So I just want to paste that in. It's really simple, and this will let us see what our results look like in their raw form. Okay, so now we have all results and a couple results here. There's our test 1 doc C. And you'll see down here we have our new thing at the bottom. There's like, there's dislike, dislike again, and like. So we've got our new field coming back for each of our documents. Now let's display it with something that will show the user the sentiment of the document. So show either the text, dislike or like, or an image, or I mean you can use your imagination here. We go back into edit page, and I got a lot of crazy ideas for what to show as dislike and like given some of the recent news, but I kept it with just a simple icon. Okay. So we go back to display properties, and I'm going to open this XSL editor again. And again, this is another development tool in SharePoint that you don't really want to be in. So you want to copy the reason I'm copying all of my stuff out and then copying it back in is because this is just very hard to use. So I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with my new core results. So let's look for my field. Oops. So I've got display. I created a display sentiment template, and I'm going to take the sentiment string and pass it into that template. And I'm going to do this. I wanted it up there where I could see it, an icon or some text right up on the title, so it stood out to me, not like gigantic or anything. So I found where the title area was, and I stuck it in behind there. So all I'm doing with the display sentiment transformation and I copied this. There's a default one in there they tell you to use on one of the MSDN articles, which is display string. If you just wanted to show that sentiment field, I could just pass it into display string, and it'll just put it on the page somewhere. But I wanted to do something a little more fancy. So I'm doing an XSL choose on the string that comes to me, the sentiment string, and if it's like, I want to add this SharePoint quick I like it tag, just to show a happy face next to it, and then also the string that comes back from fast, which is like, and the same thing for dislike, except I don't have a sad icon to use. Nobody likes to see that. So if I just grab all of this, and I plug it into our XSL editor for the core results part. I click OK. Save and close, and this is where the magic happens. There you go. So you have your little sentiment displaying. you know what you're looking at. If you refine by that, you get a good feeling or understanding what you're looking at. So that's there are other things we could have done, extending the core results web part and some other crazy things, but we wanted to go with some of the most common things you might do to get the breadth of the crowd. So hopefully you can see from this demo end to end how you look at your content, transform it somehow, or analyze it, get that field into the search index, and then you can use it on the front end to display to your users. So.
That's great. Thank you very much, Dan. As we said, this was an example of how we can create what seems like to a user a fairly basic change to the front end. But really our goal here was to show you some of the tools that you have at your hands. What I want to do now is flip over and show you something that we prepared earlier. That's something that shows you kind of how you can actually take it a lot further. So if this will come up. There it goes. So this is an example of a search-driven application that we've spent some time to try and really change the way that search looks. This is an example of taking the kinds of customizations that Dan has done, combining it with a business or a requirement from the business, and actually creating a completely new user experience. So here, if I type in business process management, again, this is all running on SharePoint. You can see we get back, you can see the hallmarks of fast search for SharePoint kind of peeking through with the previews here, but you can see some extensions that have come up that you wouldn't have seen before. For example, seeing some of the visual navigators here on the left. And so what I can do as an example here of a way that we've extended this is I can click on this navigator, and actually I've pinpointed now where the documents that I've been looking for actually reside. I can interact with this bar chart and find, for example, just projects and see those that piece of information. So what you can see here is that this has taken the kinds of things that Dan has been showing and taking it to the next level. Where it gets really, really interesting, and I advise you to go and see the session on search-driven applications, is when you actually start to think about how could I integrate this to make someone's task easier, to actually make it not just about searching for something, but actually completing a goal that I have. So we did something fairly simple on here, where what we can do here is, let's say, for example, what I'm trying to do is I'm going through a series of PowerPoints that I've got, and I'd like to create a new deck out of the PowerPoints that I found. So I can drag and drop this PowerPoint over to the right-hand side here that I found. And just for kicks, I can go and pick one that doesn't match that. If I can get it to go up. Almost there. There it goes. And then if I click download PowerPoint, what this is doing now is it's generating the PowerPoint that I had first created there, and allowed me to actually take what I'd created inside my search-driven application and found using search, and has actually built something new out of it. So the reason that we show this example here is to sort of try to show you the kinds of things that you can do when you take the changes that Dan has shown and take them, really far to the next level. There's a lot more that we can show on this, and in fact, we'll have some information up on our site, Microsoft.com/enterprise search around this, but it just gives you a good idea. So we've shown this. What we're going to do now is just kind of review some of the things that we've spoken about. We've shown you some of the customization options that you have, the tools that are available around fast search for SharePoint. We've tried to talk a little bit about some of the issues and concerns that we see and things that we think about with respect to customizing. One of the key things that Dan showed you was how do you actually get a view inside the pipeline to actually see what's happening so that you can see the kinds of changes you've made. And then on the front end, again with just seeing the XML, how can I actually see the raw feedback of what I'm doing so I know that when I transform it, it's going to be what I want. And then finally, how exactly can the pipeline extensibility specifically turn around and actually change the way that a customer or your customers can actually see this. So hopefully this has been useful for you. What we've also done is, in the slides that will be available, we've got a wrap-up of some of the areas that you can look to get some more information about this. This is really important, I think, because our goal wasn't to try and just blast code at you without really you having anywhere to get it. So what we've done is tried to enable you to get some of this, to see some of the things that we're talking about on there. So that's all we've got for today. Are there any questions?
Is it possible to conditionally run that the whole that just so it's not applying to the whole collection?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, the way that I can think of doing that, unless Barry has a better way, is to pass it some sort of parameter or key off one of the inputs you're passing in, and then write conditional logic in your code versus trying to conditionalize it somewhere else. So just return out of it or write an empty document as the field. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
This would only do it on load, right? The first time it would call it, not every time it's being searched, right?
Yes.
Right.
Every time you get the hit initially.
But then you don't have to.
The document, but when everything then it wouldn't affect it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And it is, I don't know if you want to talk about it, but performance-wise, it is smart to keep it sort of minimalistic in terms of how many libraries you're loading and things of that nature.
But there are tricks that you can do to make that quicker. For example, very quickly moving to a very lightweight web service or something for helping you thread through threads to do that. So there are tricks that you can do to help speed that up, for sure. And one thing also to point out, we have an interactive session going on tomorrow. I think it's the graveyard slot, the last one of the day, where we'll have another architect. We'll have one of our technical sales folks. And the goal of that session will really be to drive Q&A. So we've had some pre-prepared material, but also we'll be happy to have long discussions with you if you have some specific topics that you'd like to talk about.
The tool you mentioned, job post, is it available on where can we get it?
It's a part of the fast search for SharePoint distribution in the bin directory. Yep.
Yes. Yes, document preview is limited to Word and PowerPoint from us, but we have partners like BA Insights who can extend it to do other things. And it's specifically, it doesn't do Excel, mostly because the previews for Excel don't have a whole lot of meaning to people. So, but yeah. And it's good to know also that you have to have a WAC license in order to be able to see those previews. You can search PDF documents, but it doesn't preview. It doesn't show the thumbnail for the PDF documents. But, absolutely, it's full search through them, yeah.
You said there was another session. Are you going to be touching on search database content as well?
The session tomorrow is less about, we may touch on it, but if there's specific questions you'd like to ask, feel free to come along and just ask the question. Literally, the goal of that session, it's an interactive, was just to get a panel of people who've been out there, done this in the real world, and could help to answer real questions that you might have. We think that would be...
There's a hands-on lab that goes over BCS. You should just be able to call that. Also, if you come to the SharePoint booth, we'll have some fast guys there. I'll personally be there 12:30 to 3:30 on Thursday. Plus, also come to the interactive session tomorrow and bring your questions. If we
as you can tell, we're excited about this product. And one of the challenges of bringing fast into the mainstream Microsoft world is there's still some things that are a little tougher to do than would ordinarily be true. I say some things, quite a few things. But the value to the business, though, is huge. And we really think that there's a lot of value if you can try and dive beneath the surface a little bit. Yeah.
So when you had this executable that you put on there for this one job to do, when would it? I'm trying to understand best practice. When would it get crazy? Would you ever have 300 of those that do all kinds of different things? And then how do you make sure that this document only goes through these 14 executables as opposed to all 500 of them? When do you stop?
It's a good question. The way it's designed at the moment, this is not something that's designed to have 300 executables running unless you have a lot of time for it to happen. So there, as with almost everything to do with pulling content through a search platform, there is a level of A, how much time do you have? And B, how much content are you actually going to be pushing? If you have 300 executables, but you're only crawling, 500,000 documents, and you never have to do it again, then actually that may not be so bad. But it really comes down to the requirements you have. I don't think there's anything specifically in the system that would inhibit you from doing some crazy things. But probably common sense and your ability to debug and all those kinds of things would eventually catch up with you. But there's no magic number. Yeah, Jeff.
It's like 5, okay?
It's designed to be changed, but it's not very fast. You have to do some tricks.
And what time is your session tomorrow, Jeff?
I don't remember. I think it's right after lunch.
Right after lunch. Okay, great. Do you have a question down here?
So the takeaway is that you're really just augmenting the steps. You're adding additional steps to the process.
To the pipeline. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So and as I said before, there is the thought that there are other things that you can do to make the user experience, but from a perspective of extending it, yes, that's the place that you would do it for that. The other option, of course, is if you have something that you want to do in your connector side, where you build a new connector to do it.
Maybe I missed it. Are you able to select? I guess it kind of simple. Are you able to selectively apply which file types those steps are assigned to? Can you say I want this step to only apply to PDFs, or do you have to fire up your assemblies to get that kind of level of functionality?
Yes, I think you could. Boom. Yeah, so you can have multiple inputs, right, in the pipeline extensibility file. So one of them, like in my example, would be body, and then the other would be file extension. And so you could write your logic based on that.
Those needs to be in your assemblies, not declaratively in your definition.
Correct.
Yes.
Still going to execute. Gotcha.
Yep.
There are some good TechNet articles on it as well. There are some bad TechNet articles on it. Some
You
of
should
our,
run it through this engine.
yeah. some of our colleagues have written some really good stuff on it. I've presented on this in the past, so definitely come to the booth, come to our question session tomorrow. I'll have a VM up and running with everything on it, so if you guys want to see anything specific, I'll be able to hopefully show it to you.
Great. Question here? I don't think they're on. We will repeat it. If you...
So where did you get the document location from in your spatial refiner, your map refiner? Is
That was an extension of the pipeline.
This is you coded.
In this case, it was an extension of the pipeline where we were putting the document location in there. It was actually no. Sorry, I correct myself. That was actually already in the metadata of the document. So we were pulling content in that already had a location field on it.
So you mentioned those input properties. There's more than just the two.
So if the content may already have properties, additional properties that are attached to it, depending on what repository it's coming from. So you can map directly to those if you want. So, okay. All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. We appreciate it. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.